Kweku, he's right to say that over 60 games, there will be a game where you don't turn up or it doesn't really happen for you, it doesn't really pan out the way you want. The problem is for Manchester United and Erik ten Hag is that out of the 60 games, it's probably like 20, 25 where they're not turning up, where they're looking second best, where they're looking like they don't necessarily have that desire to go on and win the game. They're not organised well. You could question the commitment of some of the players based on some of the displays that we've seen over the last year and a half, not just at the start of this season. He really does need to get it right and quickly, doesn't he?
He does. And I know that there's a lot of United fans that were looking at the first 3 games of the season. Okay, it didn't go the best. They beat Fulham. They lost against Brighton last minute, and they lost against Liverpool. But then United fans were saying, okay, after this international break, let's see where we're at. And I'm not being that impressed. Against Southampton, granted, they got the win, but fortuitous, I feel. Like if Southampton didn't miss that penalty, the game could have gone in a different direction. The big win in the League Cup and draws against Twente and Crystal Palace have not impressed me. And so they can say they're unbeaten since the international break, but they've not put forth performances that fill anybody with fear. They're Manchester United. And what I fear for Manchester United is that the standards have dropped so much that the game against Twente, no one really batted an eyelid, really. It was a case of, okay, we expected Manchester United not to beat FC Twente at home in the Europa League, especially when United put out a very, very strong side. And so for Erik ten Hag, I don't necessarily think he lasts the season. I think he's a manager that has shown that he can win major trophies. He's done that. He deserves credit. In his first season, they finished 3rd. But I just don't think United are good enough, and I don't think the messaging is getting through to the players. And as a result of that, they're not getting the results they need. This is an opportunity on the weekend to beat a Spurs side that are also reeling. But I don't know if they do that. I don't think they're good enough to do that. And unfortunately for them, I think it's going to be a very difficult season.
It is going to be a very interesting season, at least for Manchester United, because we come into this one with the context of Manchester United at the end of last season were very, very close from what we were reading and hearing to pulling the trigger on Erik ten Hag and moving him on and bringing someone else in. And then he wins the FA Cup, and all of a sudden the opinion on him completely swings back the other way, which I found strange at the time, if I'm being honest, because to go from, really seriously questioning whether this guy's good enough to adoring him because he oversaw a victory in a one-off game, to me that was I just couldn't get my head around that. It didn't make any sense to me. Then you fast forward through the summer and you knew, because it was so public, that Manchester United were speaking to other candidates, obviously didn't find necessarily the guy that they wanted, and so they stuck with Erik ten Hag. But continuing with Erik ten Hag always felt like a temporary thing. The contract extension that everyone was talking about, they triggered something that was already in his previous contract. It wasn't, here's another 3 years, here's another 4 years, we really believe in you. He's never really had that show of faith from the football club. And I'm at a point now where I just don't think there's an excuse anymore for some of the performances that we're seeing from them. Individual players have to take the blame, but some of them are players that Erik ten Hag himself would have directed the club into signing. People keep talking about Antony. It's too easy to use the Antony example, but that's a prime example of one that Erik ten Hag would have driven, and look how that's turned out. So then he's gone on to the following summer, and again, some of the recruitment, I would say, has been influenced by Erik ten Hag. And again, I look at the players they've brought in, and I'm not convinced they're going to move the needle. Matthijs de Ligt is a good defender, yes, but is he a top level defender? I'm not sure that he is. I thought he was at one time, not convinced anymore. Then I look at people like Manuel Ugarte, destroyer in midfield, but is he much more than that? I don't know. And then you look at the goal that they conceded the other night against Twente. I mean, there's not being at it, and then there's that. That was terrible, the way that they were ripped right through the middle. And then when Eriksen gives the ball away, there's just no cover, there's nothing at all. And Twente are in on goal. He's got to get it right quickly. And when Rashford's not playing well and Bruno Fernandes is not playing at the level that we know he can, at what point are we going to turn and say, well, maybe it's the manager not getting the most out of him?
I think we're at that point already. At least I am. It's not down to me, though. Manchester United fans, the match-going fans, seem to still have faith in Erik ten Hag, which is fair enough. I just don't see it. And I watched every minute of that Twente game, and they just weren't impressive. I don't know where the goal's going to come from. We know that Marcus Rashford blows hot and cold. I think Xerxes is a really good player, but an out-and-out number 9, he is not. Bruno Fernandes' production has dropped off a cliff over the last, say, 12 to 18 months. And Garnacho and Amad Diallo are still young players that are finding their feet on top-level football. So I don't know with Manchester United where they're going to score goals. Defensively, they make silly mistakes. And in midfield, they can't control the game. And so there's nothing really that fills opponents with fear, that fills any United fans with hope or optimism when it comes to watching their side week in, week out. And I think they're going to find it very difficult to get results, even on the weekend against a Spurs side that I haven't been impressed with this year. But at least I can see clearly what they're trying to do, even if I disagree with sometimes the way they go about it. I think it's Manchester United side that lost and they lack identity, and it's gonna cost them further on in this season.
You mentioned Spurs there. Obviously, they have had an up and down start to the season. There's been flashes of good things from Ange Postecoglou's side, but some of those issues that they had at the second half of last season have kind of creeped over into this new season. They still can't defend set pieces for love nor money. The high line still causes them problems. You can see that. It feels to me like that might work in United's favour, given the personnel that United have. But on Spurs, where are you at with them? How far can they go this season? What's a realistic target for Ange Postecoglou's side? Because I'm not sure that anything higher than 5th at the moment is really that realistic.
Yeah, well, Ange set himself up and said he always wins trophies in the second season.
What is he doing?
And so what is the priority? Is the priority the Premier League, or is the priority to win a domestic or European trophy? I think Spurs are a decent enough team. I think they're a side that have got good players, but I don't know if they've got one world-class player. I think Son has declined physically. I talked to some Spurs fans and they're telling me he's not the player that he was a couple of years ago, despite the fact that last season he scored 17 league goals. And so they haven't got that X factor that they used to have for almost a decade in Harry Kane, who'd get him a goal out of nowhere. Son's not what he used to be. I think that this season Maddison's come on physically, but still he's one of Ange's first substitutions, despite the fact that Ange talked about him improving in that side of his game this season. And so for Spurs, they just lack that bite. They lack that extra bit of quality that I think you need to get over the line in terms of finishing the top 4 or winning silverware. But I do think they will go to Old Trafford and leave with something, because I worry for Manchester United. I think they're in a very, very sorry state, and I think the Spurs are clearly a better side than them.
What have you made of Solanke's start to life at Tottenham? Obviously, it was disrupted by that injury problem that he had, but he's off the mark now. What will that do for his confidence?
It was huge. You saw it. You saw like the relief when he scored against Brentford. He needed that. It's difficult for Dom Solanke because he's always going to be hit with a price tag. He has no control over that. He only has control over his performances, and all he can try and do is live up to that price tag. It's difficult though, because with you being brought in for 60 million, people are expecting 20 goals. He's only ever had one good goal scorer in the season in the Premier League, and that was last year. And so for Solanke, I think if he gets double figures, that looks like a good season for him. Double figures in the Premier League. But I think it'll be harsh to judge him right now. Well, let's judge him come Christmas time and let's see where he's at, because we need to see that he's an upgrade on Richarlison, and so far he hasn't showed me that.
Yeah, there's still a long way to go before I'll be convinced that the £65 million was money well spent on Dominic Solanke. A player that I do want to give some credit to, though, he's a player that in the past I've said and felt wasn't quite at this level, and maybe was a bit lucky to have got a move to a club of Spurs' size. It's the first and last time I'll ever say anything about Spurs positively.
Club of Spurs'
size. No, because it felt to me like he got a move that was kind of him then going on to punch slightly above his weight. And I'm talking about Brennan Johnson. I looked at him in the past and I thought, yeah, very pacey, very direct, and maybe one day, if he can sort the end product out, he could take that next step. That step came a little bit early for me. I think Spurs paid a bit too much money for him at the time, and given the context in which they signed him. But obviously he took a lot of abuse over the last few weeks, particularly after the Arsenal game. And since then, he's come back, he's quietened down the critics, and he's got 3 goals in 3 games. Yeah,
well done to him. And again, any sort of abuse that players suffer is unwarranted. Their footballers are going out there and doing their jobs, and he's done well to, like you say, quieten down that noise and score in his last couple of games, or last 3 games. But I don't know if he's a player that starts for a side that finishes in the top 4. Like you say, the move may have come a bit too early, but Andrew's got a history of maybe not targeting the biggest names. He wants to get players in their infancy and work with them and progress together. And so he might be one of those that maybe in a year or 2 time we see a player that is of the level that is required to help Spurs finish in the top 4, but I don't think he's at that level quite yet. But again, footballers develop at different times. Remember when Gareth Bale signed for Spurs, and there's that record that they can't win a game with him in the side, and then we all know what he went on to be. So we don't know what players are going to be. We don't know how players are going to develop. We need to give them time. But if you ask me about my opinion of Brendan Johnson right now, I don't think he's of the level of a top 4 side.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think, the abuse that he got and all the rest of it was completely unacceptable and unnecessary. And to see a player bounce back from that, I always quite enjoy it, no matter who they're playing for. Because I think that as a footballer, people see you as a bit of a punch bag, and they find it so easy to take to social media and just chuck words at you and things that they would never say to you on the street, that they would never say to you if you were face to face with them. And so when I read stories like that, particularly when you're talking about still relatively young men who, are in the spotlight and have to have that maturity to be able to deal with it in the right way, you can see why it gets to them. You can see why you might lose your rag and go back at someone, which obviously in that position you've got to make sure you don't do. To go out and do your talking on the pitch is the best possible response. And Brendan Johnson, going around cupping his ear after he scored some of the goals as well, is as if to say, kind of, what have you got for me now? I'm pleased for him, because I think he got a lot of really, really bad criticism when actually it was an entire team that looked toothless, particularly in that Arsenal game, rather than just him in isolation. How do you see this one going then, Kweku? Because it's another one that could produce a lot of goals. Man United haven't scored a great deal of those this season, but they've got the players within their ranks. Spurs play a high line. You know that they're going to be front-footed in their approach. How do you see this one playing out?
2-2.
2-2.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a draw. It's a difficult one to call. Would you be surprised Man United won? No. Would you be surprised if Spurs won? No. These are two sides that, as the kids would say, are pretty mid. And it's going to be a mid-off.
Is that what they say now?
On Sunday, yeah, apparently so.
I have to nail that one down. It is two sides that are pretty mid. As they But, I mean, to me, I look at the two attacks, right? And I know that Rashford and a number of others haven't really produced at the level that we know they can for Manchester United so far this season. But at some point that's going to click, because they're too good of players, more so Bruno Fernandes I'm talking about here, to not go out there and impact the game. And I just think with the chances that Spurs give you at Old Trafford, it could be a bit of a lift-off point for Erik ten Hag's Man United if they beat one of the so-called Big Six. So I'm going to go for a Manchester United victory, but I think both teams will score. So United 3, Spurs 1 is what I'm going to go for. You're surprised, Kweku.
Nah, I don't see it. Manchester United, they're not at the level required to challenge for a top 4 place in the Premier League, and I don't see them beating Spurs, but I see them getting a draw. Fair.
We'll see. We'll be back next week and we'll look back on them. Kweku, thank you very much.
On AM, on DAB, via the talkSPORT app and on your smart speaker. talkSPORT.